Yeah, welcome back. This is Dale M with MELS 603. This is Wednesday, June 13th. We're already to week 4 of 10. I can't believe how fast it's going. And the summer goes fast. So let's start as we normally do with our weekly schedule where we're supposed to be. We're in week 4, June 13th. We're doing rights and discipline this week. So you had to read 5 and 6 in the principal's guide, and I had you do observe a due process, disciplinary incident, and then interview our other school disciplinary and ask them a couple questions that are in discussion board about incidents. I guess most importantly, what I want you to understand is you have to have a process. It's outlined. There's a lot of documentation we're going to go through tonight. But I guess the biggest thing is the takeaway is it takes a long time to do due process. And you can't ever guess which one of them is going to get appealed to the principal or to the superintendent or to the board or go to court. You never know. It can be things that you think, boy, this is going to go bad, and you never hear a peep later on, and things that you don't even notice, you end up in court over. Just the most minute things. But the point is you can't pick and choose. Due process is substantive and procedural. You have to have, you have to have processes in place, but you have to follow the procedures. And just as soon as you don't get written statements or a kid comes in and says, yeah, I did it, you don't bother to get witness statements, and you give them a little punishment and move on, the parent goes ballistic, and next thing you know, you've got no proof, no evidence, and you get skinned. And so the point of observing due process and talking with administrators, what I hope you came away with a sense of is that if you do it right, it's long and involved, but you got to do it right every time. It's one of those things that it's about your job, so it's an every time thing. So that's what we had to do this week. All right, let's look at our close that. Let me open this one. All right, so week 4, you should be completing task 3 and starting task 4, and you should complete task 4 this week. Please remember, there is no peer reviewing of task 4. Just slap it in there for me to look at and move on. So as soon as I see your 4s, I will tell you if it's okay, compile and submit for your Turnitin check. Once you get all 4 tasks together, you do not have to do peer reviews on OMA 4. Now, you will do 12 competencies in OMA 4. 8 are defined by the handbook. 4 you choose. And then the second half of the semester, you will do the other 9 when you do the skip. So let me reiterate that. For the OMA, you will do 12. You get to pick 8. The 8 are defined for you. You get to pick 4. You'll do the other 9 later on the semester for the skip. Now, I'm going to briefly, for some of you who are getting ahead, which is good, I don't want to slow you down, I want to quickly look at skip task 1 again. I will cover skips task 1 and 2 more in depth next week, but I've got a couple reminders for the skip because this is so important. Let me close that out. Let me go here. We've already got it loaded. The candidate will lead the skip team to conduct a needs assessment to determine gaps in communication between internal and external communities. Way, way, way too many times, students start reading that prompt and they see needs assessment. And they go, oh, I did that back in a previous evidence artifact, and so I see all this academic stuff. No. This needs assessment is only about gaps in communication. This is not a copy and paste from somewhere else, other work that we have done. This is not the needs assessment that we did in the app cell. This is not that. This is a completely different needs assessment that only looks at gaps in communication. And then when we come up with our short-term goals are things like using social media to better connect with parents, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Don't use any of the inappropriate sites. I saw one of those the other day. Don't use dating sites or dating apps or things like that. That's not what I'm talking about, social media. I'm talking about information like WhatsApp. You can form those kinds of groups. But that's just kind of the short term, is we're going to connect with parents. Please remember that long-term goals are things like, once we have communicated with them to get them there, we're going to have events at school where we can further communicate what we need for them to work with their children on, like family math night, family reading night. Again, that's increasing communication where you're moving information from you to the parents so they can help their kids. So short-term, the social media kind of things. In the old days, we had email chains and phone trees, but we are a little more sophisticated than that. We'd like for you to use more modern technology to hook on with your parents. And once you get them hooked, we want you to get them into the building, and we want you to let us help you help your child, kind of thing. So if you do that, you're good to go. You don't have to bring all that stuff from the app cell in. Don't let the needs assessment fool you. Read on to the second sentence, and it says to determine gaps in communication. Now, impromptu, it's very simple. You go to the Teacher Working Conditions Survey, or from South Carolina, the Advanced Ed Survey. We're looking at school leadership, not teacher leadership. That's empowerment. We're looking at school leadership, your administrative team. There should be some survey data on them. That's what we're looking at for improvement. So later on, when we have a set of recommendations and that become specific activities in our marketing plan, in task 3, there'll be 3 types of recommendations in that marketing plan, or activities that came out of recommendations. There'll be activities that address short-term goals and social media, activities that address long-term goals, things like family math night, and then activities that address recommendation for improving school administration. So when you get to task 3, you're going to translate the recommendations that you made in 1 and 2. You're going to translate them into specific activities and a marketing plan in 3. And that marketing plan will have activities that address short-term goals, long-term goals, and school leadership. This one is the simplest and easiest one. If you don't get thrown off by needs assessment, that's where everybody just absolutely makes a wrong turn and crashes into the wall. They send me 20 pages. This took forever. I'm like, it's got nothing to do with the skip, though. This one, don't overthink it. It is as simple as it seems. The only way you can get this one wrong is if you overthink it and start doing needs assessment for things that are not communication related. We want better parent. This is not about parent involvement. This is gaps in communication. Yes, it's about parent involvement, but it's more specific to gaps in communication. It's not discipline. It's not academics. This is trying to, we want to eventually get those parents to come to school so that we can communicate with them directly and give them things to help them help their child, both knowledge or even materials to help their child. But we must communicate and we must hook them first. And that's what this is all about. So if you can remember that, this one goes really well. Anybody have any questions about skip task 1, prompts 1 and 2? All right. Let's move it on then. All right. Here's an article that came out recently. School assistant principal facing criminal charges recently because she failed to report a child being sexually assaulted and actually pressured the child, and they punished the child rather than the person who sexually assaulted her. Now, this one has happened in just the last few weeks. I get these every day. about not reporting what went on in your building or trying to cover it up, or basically trying to extort and blackmail students into not telling what happened to them. When I was in the central office in district in this state, we had to fire an entire high school administrative team, all the way down to the data manager, from the principal to the data manager, because they conspired to cover up a crime and actually suspended the victim and threatened her. Very similar thing is to this. This is not an outlier. I have dealt with one worse than this one. Yes, I have dealt with the exact same kind of thing. It was worse than this case. So this is not some theoretical. The biggest problem that we have in the school business is we require schools to report upon themselves. And we have a lot of folks who have situational ethics. Now, in my opinion, situational ethics means you don't have any. Ethics is something you have all the time. It's kind of like pregnancy. You either are or you aren't. Ethics are the same way. You have them or you don't. Situational ethics means you don't have any. And we know that the least reliable form of data is self-report. And so we asked school administrators to report upon themselves, and there's penalties for too many suspensions, and there's penalties for too many persistently dangerous activities, and there's bad PR in the community. And so I've had folks say to me, I'm not reporting this stuff. You got to catch me. I'm not reporting it. Why would I do this to myself? Well, because it's the right thing to do. Not the right thing in my opinion. Bad for my career. Well, you won't have a career if I catch you cheating, though. There's somebody in all of your districts that's what they do. They catch you when you cheat. As much social media and as much scrutiny as there is on schools now, folks can't take the risk of letting you cheat and hoping you don't get caught. The people above you, when they catch you cheating, are going to have to take action against you. And as we're going to read in the handbook in just a few minutes, if you get caught, you lose your license, and so that means you're out of a job. So the trick is we've talked before, work on the little things before they become the big things. But you got to report everything that happens. You got to call the police when things go wrong. We've been working on this field trip. And the first thing you do if there's an accident on a field trip is you call the police. And I've had people say, oh, we don't want, parents will be hysterical. We don't want people to, to think we're unsafe or to worry. Well, parents will be even more hysterical if they find out their kid was in a bus wreck and you didn't tell them, or that you didn't call the police, or that you tried to give first aid and didn't call the police and the medical, and then you got lawsuits where parents claim all these injuries later on. I know that it's not always the best PR, but it's the law, and if you don't follow it, bad things are going to happen, just like with this lady. Not only did she lose her job, she's going to lose her freedom. They're going to put her in jail. She's going to serve some time. It's going to cost her a bunch of money. There'll be a civil suit after this criminal suit, and she'll lose the rest of her money. But as soon as she gets convicted in this criminal suit, the parents will come after her in civil court, and they'll wear her out. So it's not going to go well for this lady. All right. So here it is. Here's the North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Procedures Manual. Now, this covers everything from disciplinary incidents to alternative schools. Everything that's on what we call the other side of the aisle is covered by this manual. There's one just like it in South Carolina. And there it is. So, legal scholars, remind me why we start with the State Board of Education and then DPI, and then we start with all of these laws from the General Assembly. What is DPI's role? North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, South Carolina Department of Public Instruction. What is their role? Their role is to interpret and enforce Laws of the General Assembly and policies of the State Board of Education. That's what they do. And so when people say, well, who are these people? You know, a bunch of geeks in Raleigh or in Columbia. Why should we listen to them? It's not them that you're listening to. It's your lawmakers in Columbia and Raleigh, respectively, the legislators, and then it's the State Board of Education. So you have two things that are in this manual. You have state law and you have board policy. And it's DPI's job to interpret and enforce those laws and policies. And this is an interpretation manual. It tells you down to gory details when we get to the back, everything that you have to know. And if you ignore it, you do it at your own peril because that's right, you carry out the General Assembly's laws. And Lindsay, thank you for that, Lindsay. That's exactly right. So when people say, well, I don't listen to DPI, well, then you're a nitwit. You're going to be unemployed. You're going to be an unemployed nitwit soon. They themselves are not the entity that you have to worry about. They represent your legislators and your State Board of Education. And they also do enforcement. So they have the weight of the law, the authority of the law behind them. Whether you like them or not, or how you feel about them, you need to understand they carry the full weight of the law. Yeah, Lindsay used to work there exactly in federal programs, NCDPI. That's who they are, and that's what they do. Now, not just because Lindsay said that. I have friends who work, you know, when I was in the business, and I still have friends who work there. They are smart and good people. I talked with a lady yesterday who's retiring from DPI, and she may come to work with us. Those people have a lot of skill and ability, and she's very prized. She's been working in accreditation, and we'd love to have her join us here because she knows the laws. She knows the policy. She's, you know, I worked with, not full time, but I worked a good bit and consulted and worked with DPI for about 5 years in my career in the central office. I don't know that it made me any smarter. I certainly learned a lot from working there. But my point is we have people who get confused about personalities and people, and they feel like these folks can't tell them what to do. You're wrong. And they'll prove that to you if you get that wrong. So don't get that wrong. I'm belaboring the point here, but I don't want to be answering the questions later tonight or on in the future. I don't want you to have this. Well, you know, we don't really have to do that stuff, do we? Yes, you really have to do this stuff. We don't do that at our school. Well, yeah, until you get caught. And as if I told you before, it's all fun and games till somebody gets their eye put out, and then there's consequences. Your school could be doing it the same way for the last 20 years, but when an incident occurs and you didn't do the right thing, you can't. Your excuse in court can't be, well, we've always done it that way. Were you aware that there was a manual and law that says you weren't supposed to do it that way, that you were supposed to do it? Well, yeah, but since we did it always did it that way, we figured that trumped the new stuff. No, it doesn't. And nobody can give you permission to break the law. You do that at your own peril. So, reporting incidents in Power School, editing, using reports to check incidents, reporting behaviors, reporting all these different things, procedures for incident data, procedures for alternative learning programs, disciplinary schools, all the codes and descriptions. So let me start here. Let me move this out of the way. Responsible for creating procedures for complying with statutory requirements for carrying out state board policies and also the General Assembly laws. I mean, that's who they are and what they do. The value of this is that data, there are federal, state and federal mandates to report this data. The Office of Civil Rights uses it, but it also is illustrative and enlightening to you in school to look at your data to be able to address things that are going on in your building. You can look at demographics of student offenders, the frequency, the locations, relationships. When it says relationship between incident data and other data collected, antecedent behaviors. You see a lot of little things that are, you see a lot of gang activity, and all of a sudden you start saying, whoa, I'm getting a lot of weapons in the building. Well, the weapons didn't come first. The gang behavior did. That's when you should have addressed it. Those are the kinds of things that you can see from your data. So everybody knows you have to put your data in PowerSchool. You have to keep up with your consequences. But here's the biggie. This may be the most important thing in the whole manual. And people just breeze right by it because it doesn't look very important. Disciplinary data reporting is organized around incidents. Period. We report what happened. I've had people say, well, I didn't report that because we didn't suspend the kid. Suspension's an outcome. We don't report out. We do report outcomes. We report consequences. But we report based around incidents. So this notion that if I don't give a kid a suspension, in or out of school suspension, that I don't have to report it to Raleigh, no, you're wrong. We report even if all we did was conference the kid. It still has to be reported. I mean, that falls under the same thing as if Dr. Pickard shot me and he left town and they didn't catch him, then I wouldn't be dead. No, that doesn't have anything to do with him shooting me. That it still happened. Regardless of what his punishment is, it still happened. This is the hardest thing to get folks, even in the business, intelligent people, to understand. What you do to the kid as a result of what he did has no bearing on what you have to report. You have to report what he did or she did. And you can't underreport it. You can't say, kids fought on a school bus and you reported as bus misbehavior. No, bus misbehavior is jumping seats and hanging your arm out the window. A fight's a fight no matter where it occurs on your campus. That's classic underreporting. We had a middle school in Charlotte that had a lot of bus misbehavior, and finally the parents, who many of them didn't speak English, went to the news media asking for help and found out that there was sexual assaults were happening on the bus, and the people went over to the school and said, yeah, we put it down. We reported it. You reported as bus misbehavior. You didn't report it as sexual assault or rape or sexual offense. What happened on the bus? You can't work here if you're that dumb. And I made sure that happened. You can't work for us if you're that dumb. That it happened on the bus has no bearing on what you report. You report what happened. You have victims and you have offenders. And then you have actions that you take or consequences. But that does not impact what you have to report in terms of the incident. The incident stands alone. It is not affected by if you caught somebody or if you punish somebody. It still happened. Once you understand that, it gets a lot easier. Once you understand that, and see, don't get buyer's remorse either, or what I used to call reporter's remorse. In the heat of the moment, you two kids are fighting, and you've waited in the middle of them. A couple of you, they got a couple of punches in on you, and maybe blacked your eye a little bit, or like me one time, had a pretty significant cut under both eyes. But I came out with one under each arm. But I was worse for wear, though. I was on Channel 9 with Kim, what's her name, Bratton. I was on Channel 9, two big old black eyes, big cuts under my eyes. But, I got the best of them. Nah, I don't know about that, but, So in the heat of the moment, that was a fight. These kids make me so mad. And then the next day you cool off a little bit, administrators, and you get to thinking, that's going to look bad on me. It wasn't really that bad, was it? Maybe that was just aggressive behavior. No, it was a fight. And that's why the state reporting guidelines are 2448. Anything that's reportable to law enforcement must be reported to the state within 24 hours. All others, 48. So anything that carries an RO code or a PD code, RO being reportable offense, a PD code being persistently dangerous. That's the very worst incidents. And then there's 4. UBs but have a general statute prefix like communicating threats and affray. Affray is a public fight, communicating threats. Although they start out with a UB prefix, they have a general statute suffix, and so those have to be reported to law enforcement. Anything that has to be reported to law enforcement must be reported to the state within 24 hours. Guess why they make you do that? So that you won't get buyer's remorse, and then next day decided, well, maybe it wasn't that bad, so I'll wait and put it in, and if I feel differently tomorrow or the next day. No. A fight is a fight today, and it's the same thing tomorrow. The only thing changed is you cooled off a little bit. You thought, well, you know, I'll hurt myself more than I'll hurt them by putting this in as a fight. No, that's not the way it happened. I had a middle school principal who went on TV without permission and said, we haven't had a suspension for a fight all year. I think I broke the land speed record getting out to her school. It's very simple. They had more fights than they'd ever had. She just wasn't suspending them. She wasn't following the handbook. She was decriminalizing them, calling them aggressive behavior, because the fight carried automatic suspension. She was just calling them aggressive behavior and giving them a little ISS and pretending that they weren't happening. You know, I was slipping walking down the hall on the terrazzo floor. Blood's real slippery on the terrazzo floors. It's just a slaughterhouse. Kids were fighting. It was just like the bell rang. They just ran out in the middle of the hallway and resumed where they left off last period. Never seen anything as bad in my life. And she went on TV, had the temerity, had the audacity, the gall to go on TV and say, we hadn't had a suspension, an out-of-school suspension for a fight all year. She was careful not to say we haven't had any fights all year. She got to retire shortly thereafter. You can't be that dumb. So here's your general statutes. This is your first one, 288. Requires certain criminal offenses occurring. Schools be reported immediately and to law enforcement immediately and to the state within 24 hours. And so here is the first wave. They also under state board policy. So here's the bad ones, the worst ones. These are the ones that will have a PD, persistently dangerous prefix. Homicide, assault with injury, assault with weapon, rape, sexual offense, sexual assault, kidnapping, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and then taking indecent liberties with a minor. Now, in the back of this manual, you will have very detailed, embarrassing definitions of these, by the way. You can't mistake them. You won't. I mean, if you read the definitions, you won't get them wrong. I made a mistake. No, well, then you didn't read the definitions. If you read the manual, you will not get this wrong. And if you choose not to report these as something else, then you're going to be then you're criminally liable, as that assistant principal was, or as that high school group was. All right. So these will have a PD prefix. If you have too many of these over a 2-year period, you become a persistently dangerous school. Kids opt out and they will reconstitute your school. That means you have to go home. So, you know, I've had administrators say to me, well, you know, if I report all this stuff, you're going to get me in 2 years. So I'll take the chance that you won't catch me. But I had to explain to them, if I catch you, I'm going to send you home now. We'll help you in the second year. If the first year your data is bad, we'll actually come out and we'll send people who know what they're doing out, and we'll help you that second year. Since obviously you don't know what you're doing, we'll send some people out to help you. We've got a criminologist and we've got some other folks. I'll even come out from time to time, and we'll help you. But if you get caught not reporting, I'll also come out and help you into a new career immediately. Because we can't take the bad PR. We can't, you know, we operate on trust and our integrity in the public schools, private schools, charter schools. We all operate on our integrity in the public trust. And we can't, as an institution, abide or allow or turn a blind eye to ethical violations, which are actual criminal and civil violations. Again, we can't give you permission to break the law. If we know you're doing something wrong, we're bound by the law to deal with you. You've got a chance if you report what's going on. You've got a chance because we'll come out and help you. We'll work on antecedent behaviors. We may get you some extra security. There's a lot of things we can do to help you. But if we catch you cheating, we'll help you into a new career immediately, if not sooner. Because we can't, especially if you're in a large town where you've got a lot of media presence, but even now, small towns with social media. And so 115C 1227, here's Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. You have all of these people who want this data from the state, and that's why you have to give it to them. So one of the things that you got to understand, when you start hiding suspensions, that gets the attention of the Office of Civil Rights. That becomes a federal case. You do not want that to happen. So again, reporting incidents of law enforcement, school-related arrest, zero tolerance, harassment, all these things. So zero tolerance policies, the Office of Civil Rights wants to know about that because they're actually not legal. They want to know about suspensions, expulsions, what must be reported and so what happens is principals will say, well, I read it and it said I only had to report anything that got an in or out of school suspension or expulsion. No, that's just the first bullet. And then the second one says an assignment to alternative school. And then all these things. Did you not see this list? Basically, in all this stuff, so basically anything that happens at school more than a sneeze, and if it's a wet sneeze, you have to report that. Pardon me, I hate to be crude, but anything more than a sneeze has to be reported, folks. There ain't anything I can think of that's not on this list. But but I've had people that argued, well, it says right here that any act resulting in or out of school suspension, and it didn't, and so I didn't have to. No, you didn't read on. Pretty much anything that happens in school, anything of a disciplinary nature, has to be reported. There's the list. And all these things, the list goes on and on. And so I always, one of the things I used to do with principals and CMS when I supervised is every time we'd get together, I'd offer a prize. If they could think of anything that a kid could do in their school, disciplinary-wise, it wouldn't fall under one of these categories. Anybody smart enough to figure out one thing that a kid could do and not have to be reported? Nobody ever could. That's the whole point. If a kid misbehaves, the state wants to know because somebody's asking them for that data. All right. And so you go into Power School, you have to populate 3 screens. You've heard the story before. You can't not put your suspensions into Power School because the official suspension form is only generated out of Power School, one that you might make up on your own, even if it's a nice looking form on a carbon that you ordered from Kinko's or Office Max. Those are not legal. They have to be generated from Power School for them to be a legal contract, for them to stand up in court. But the reason why we make sure that those go in is because if we don't, we're fraudulently reporting attendance. Remember, attendance is how we get paid, average daily membership. Kids suspended and not reported and county president, you get money for kids that didn't show up. That makes the state really mad. You have to revert that money immediately. So here's the part you need to read. Each school should have at least one person responsible for documenting disciplinary acts and consequences. The disciplinary data coordinator, in parentheses, that used to have a corollary, had a semicolon. It said usually this is an assistant principal. Well, now we have so many folks who are putting data in that are not there. Dean of students, they're facilitators. So it doesn't say that, but usually it's an AP. Usually all APs and principals, whatever disciplinary, whoever processes it, puts it in. The coordinator may or not be the same person who inputs the disciplinary data. Some schools, they still have a data manager and you hand them the referral and they put it in for you. I do not support that as a process or a procedure. If you took the time to process it, you can do the paperwork at the same time in terms of entering it, and you can have your computer up. You can enter it into PowerSchool at the same time. That way you're not worried about them stacking up on somebody's desk or getting raked off into a drawer. Oh yeah, everything's good, and then you find out they're 2 or 3 weeks behind. I've had that to happen. I'd go to the school and say, I hadn't seen any data in your school in the week. What's going on? Well, she's putting them in every day, and you go and you'd open up the drawer and there'd be 100 referrals in the drawer. I was going to get to those this weekend. Well, the new person will get to them on Monday. That's how important this stuff is, and this is how critical all this kind of stuff is nowadays. 2448, folks. Let me reiterate. Anything that the police are involved in, PD, RO, general statute, suffix, 24 hours, period. 48 for everything else, period. If you're outside of those time parameters, you face disciplinary action from the state. So you just got to do it. All right. You have an LEA, disciplinary data coordinator. That's usually an assistant superintendent. I used to do that as well. That was just more fun than anybody ought to be allowed to have. But they'll tell you what has to happen. That's why I said I used to work closely with DPI since we were their biggest customer. That person will tell you. I'd get calls all day. What should I do with this one? Did you call the police? Well, no. Well, hang up from me. I can't help you. I'm not the police. Call the police. Then call me back, and I'll help you. But here's the sentence that you need to understand. Regardless of who determines the data to enter or who enters the data, the principal is ultimately responsible for disciplinary data and must be thoroughly familiar with the definitions of the 16 report. Are they responsible for reporting certain crimes per 115C288? There used to be another sentence that went with that. Failure to do this or violation of this was a class 1 misdemeanor, which means you lose your license. The principals objected to that. They took that out. They didn't change the fact that will happen to you. They just didn't want it written down. Didn't change the fact that if you violate this, you will lose your license. All right, so this is how to put them in, how to edit them. I don't like the editing part. That's when people have buyer's remorse the second day they want to go in and edit them. We set some defaults on ours where they couldn't do that, or I would be notified if they did, so they wouldn't go home and sleep on it and decide to change it to something else. And see, the problem that you get into on that is we had a principal at one of the small schools charged a kid with assault on staff, serious assault on staff with injury. And so the kid got his 10 days. He went, he had his due process hearing. He was recommended for expulsion. He went to the board. The board is the only people who can, he was recommended for exclusion. We don't have expulsion in North Carolina, nor South Carolina. You can't be put out for a lifetime. You can apply to come back after a year no matter what you did. We only have exclusion now. We don't have expulsion. And so he was excluded for a year, and so he appealed to the Board of Education. And so the school was putting together, the board, had the liaison's office called the school and put the file together, and the file was sent up, and so they were going through the paperwork, and they were like, well, wait a minute. Why are we trying to exclude a kid for simple assault with no injury? She realized it was a persistently dangerous one. It was going to put him over the limit, so she went back and changed it because she had buyer's remorse. But you can't change it and then try to exclude the kid as well. Oh, she wanted him excluded, but she didn't want to have to count the offense that he did to get him excluded. So she went back into power school and changed it. I wasn't at all sad to see her go. And so PD, RO, unacceptable behavior. And then again, there are 4 that have prefixes or suffixes on the end. And so let me show you that. So here, this stuff's got all the rules. You need to read this stuff. When you get the job, you better know this thing back and front. All this stuff. Alternative learning programs in your district. All this stuff that you have to report. Okay, incident sites, offender types. Everybody that's offender is not always a student. Sometimes you have teachers who are offenders too, and people who come in who are also offenders. You have to report those as well. And so here they start, your PDs, your ROs, more PDs. See this one right here, communicating threats, affray, and disorderly conduct, and burning of a school building. There are the 4. Even though they have a UB prefix, if they have a GS suffix, you still have to report them to law enforcement. That's what that means. That's still a criminal offense. And so here are all the things that can happen in your building. And here are all description of behaviors. And here are all the consequence or action types. Anything from supervised activities to conference with students. I mean, so again, it doesn't matter what your consequence is. It matters what the incident was. We don't report based on outcomes. We report based on incidents. These are outcomes. This is what you did as a result of. So this is immaterial. Again, you saw that long list. You got to read past the first bullet that says anything you suspend a kid for, you have to report it to the state. Even if it's not a crime, you still have to report it to the state. But then it has all this other stuff. And so here's all the consequences. Here are the victim types. Here are the weapon types. Here are the alternative learning placement codes that you have to put in to Power School. And then here comes the definitions of all those things. And I mean, they get kind of gruesome here at the end, especially if you're a Baptist. It gets pretty bad. But one of my favorite cases was we had a BMT, behavior modification technician, was working in one of our public separate schools. I won't say which one. You know, those are for specific things. This was a behavior school. He was a BMT, and it was a public separate. And I don't know how it happened. They were scuffling with a pretty good sized boy. They said he was probably about 180 pounder. And they were scuffling, trying to get him into one of the padded rooms, those little rooms they go in where they can't hurt themselves when they're having these issues or fits or whatever it is. And I don't know how it happened. I went over and looked, and I couldn't figure it out. But somehow the gentleman got his arm caught in the door, and it basically tore his arm out of the socket of his shoulder. I mean, I don't mean a little bit. I mean, almost. I mean, it was awful. And so he was out of work for 6 months and had to have surgery to reattach his arm and all that business. And then it came up that he filed for his workman's comp, and his workman's comp claim was denied. He's a BMT. They were handling a wild young man, and he got hurt. How could that not be a workman's comp claim? Well, they called me and said, he has filed a lawsuit against us for denying his workman's comp claim, and we don't know why. And I went in and looked, and I said, well, mainly because the principal reported as a simple assault with no injury, so that it wouldn't come out as a PD offense. And so I went over and I talked to her, and she said, well, they sewed his arm back on, and they thought he was going to be able to use it again, so I didn't think it was too serious. I can't make this up. I cannot make this up. So there are other issues besides reporting issues. In that case, because it was reported that there was no injury, Human Resources denied his workman's comp claim. They said that the principal reported that you were not injured. And and of course we had to pay a little extra on that one since he sued us. We had to pay the claim, and we had to pay a penalty award to him for having done that. So there's also other extenuating things if you get it wrong, especially if you do it intentionally. So assault resulting in personal injury. So if substantial risk of death, serious permanent disfigurement, a coma, permanent protracted condition that causes extreme pain, protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ, or results in prolonged hospitalization. I mean, getting your arm torn off pretty much fits about 3 of those. And so here are all of the definitions. And so pleading lack of information or ignorance is no excuse. You got to get this right. You got to, if you don't know, then you need to read some of this stuff. If you don't know the difference between sexual assault, rape, and sexual offense, you better read this stuff. And if you don't know the difference between statutory rape and taking indecent liberties, you better read that stuff. You better get it right. And that's why, as soon as I get a report that there has been some sort of physical behavior to the harassment, all of a sudden I stop, I call the police. We don't handle these things, sexual assault, sexual offense, rape, and indecent liberties with a minor. We don't handle these things. We're not qualified. That's law enforcement. We can handle, verbal sexual harassment if it's just verbal. But as soon as there's any physical contact, oh no, I want the law and I want them involved. Last thing on this one, you've got to remember is you've got to read this stuff. We had to let a principal and an AP at a high school go. They had a girl that came and reported that she had been sexually assaulted or raped by a boy in the bathroom, and they set about to do an investigation, which number one was wrong. And what they found is that she was 16 years old, which is the age of consent in North Carolina, and that pretty much she had willingly gone with the boy, and then they had words later, and so she was now mad at him, so she reported that they had had sex in the bathroom. And they concluded of their own volition that, number one, we won't call the police. We'll handle this in-house because it could get ugly public relations-wise. And number two, because she was 16, that no crime had occurred. Let's read this one. I'll clean my glasses. There we go. Sexual contact with another person by force or against the will, or if the person is mentally disabled, mentally incapacitated, or physically helpless. A girl with self-contained EC. Yes, she was 16 years old, but she was in an EC self-contained unit. She was mentally incapacitated. She did not have the legal capacity to consent and will never at any age. But they said, oh, she's 16. That's the age of consent in North Carolina. She was a willing participant. She cannot consent. She's mentally disabled, self-contained. Ooh-wee. Not all the schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg have Charlotte policemen. There's several small towns on the outskirts of Mecklenburg County, and those police departments provide the school resource officers to the schools, and they do an excellent job. I'm not being ugly or facetious. But that small town police department threw the school right under the bus and backed it up over them to make sure they hit them. They came on TV and said, we feel certain something happened. We know that this was wrong, but the school tried to conduct an investigation, and they have contaminated all the evidence and all the witnesses, and said, we feel really bad for this child and her family, but there's just nothing that we can do because of the improper actions of the school. Now, what choice did we have except to let the AP and the principal go? What do you say? Yeah, we got sued by the parent, and yes, we lost, or we settled, because we acted inappropriately. We didn't read the rules. Very simple. All right, we're in the home stretch now, so that's the manual. You better read this thing. You better read this manual, and you better know this manual. All right. Every school district, let me go one more over on this one. Come on now, don't do that. Here we go. I can show you this one because it's no longer in use. This is the generation. This is WISE right before Power School. Every district, I think you'll see my name on there. Look at that. Every district makes a training manual that actually has screenshots, and they're confidential. We don't provide these for just anybody. If somebody breaks in or somebody gets to your terminal, unless they know where to go and what to do, it's not menu driven. And this looks much like Power School does today. But every district puts together one of these and does training with you. And the reason I have this tonight is go get trained. As soon as that euphoria, that first week, oh, I get calls and email, just got my first AP job. Go get trained how to put incidents in Power School today, tomorrow if necessary. But get it done now. Don't get this wrong. Two things you need to do immediately. This, and go get certified to do teacher observations so that you can pull your weight with your administrative staff. This is number one. That's number two. It's a close second, but this is number one. You better get trained. I know you know the teacher portal, that side of Power School. The other side, the administrative portal, looks nothing like it. And it's not intuitive. It's not menu driven. You got to know where you're going. So training, I had the ladies that did the training for us, a private company, make me this manual right before we let them go because we didn't have money to, once you get your training done we did ours we're large enough. We had a private consulting group, training group do it. And then when we got everybody trained the first time, we had this manual made, we let them go, but their contract ran out, and then we did it ourselves because we'd only have a few new ones every year to do. But there will be such a thing as this kind of training go. Get it done. Learn. Don't just sit down with the secretary or the data manager. Oh, I'll show you how. No, don't do that. They don't know why and the hows, and they have shortcuts, and they'll say, well, we don't put that stuff in, and we don't do this. And what they mean is I don't do this or that because I'm not liable for it, and I don't want to take the time. Go get trained. All right. And then lastly tonight, every district has a handbook, and in that handbook, they have a code of conduct. And they have their own version of the state reporting manual about things that could go wrong in the school. And all the local little policies and procedures and all the things you're supposed to do. All that kind of stuff. And then they have the infractions. And then they have the range of things that you can do. This is about arbitrary and capricious, those two standards that are in fact due process. Arbitrary is, Chase and I do the same thing. You let Chase go and you give me a week suspension. That would be arbitrary. Capricious is you give me 10 days of suspension for disruptive behavior, and the maximum is 2 days of suspension. You give more punishment than the handbook allows. But this is basically sentencing guidelines here, and that's what they're for. Make sure that you follow these. Again, the state doesn't give two figs in terms of the action or the consequence. They just want to know what happened. They don't care what you did as a result. That's not important to them. That's important at the local level. That's why you have this is basically a sentencing guidelines for students. You notice there was none of that in the state reporting manual. Here are all the things that you can do. Here are all the things that can happen. This is the places they can happen. This is the people that can do them. These are the victims it can happen to. I had all that stuff, but nowhere in there did it say if A happens, you must give them B. No. That's not what the state does. Again, they don't care what you do. They just want to know what happened. They don't care what you did as a result of. The local cares what you did as a result of. This is not in addition to or separate from. This is a continuation. It starts with the DPI's manual, with all that stuff. And then the local cares what you do to them, not the state. The local assumes you'll follow all the state rules. And now, here are your sentencing guidelines. We'll tell you what you can do with these students. Here is the range. Don't be outside of it one way or the other. If you are, you risk lawsuit and you risk sanction from your local Board of Education or administrative group. The central office is like DPI. They enforce the policies of the local Board of Education and the laws of the state. So DPI is like the superintendents or the central office for the state. The central office performs that same function for the local board and for the General Assembly. And so the local board does care what you do. They assume you're going to follow the state laws and reporting, and then they set the sentencing guidelines. And so if you're ever asked, it's a trick question. The state does not mandate any punishment, does not set any sentencing or punishment guidelines. That's up to the local Board of Education, and that's when you have a code of conduct. So when people ask me, well, which one do you follow? Well, you follow them both. They do not contradict one another. The code of conduct picks all, the state manual stops short of sentencing guidelines. Consequence is what you're supposed to give. And that's where the local board picks up through the code of conduct. And that's how it works together. Okay? That's it. And it's 8 o'clock. Isn't that amazing? Questions you have for me about reporting and about consequences? Tonight was about the legal part. Now, PBIS, people think, well, PBIS is not the answer to everything. Obviously, not old age and baldness. PBIS is not the answer to everything, but PBIS is the answer to the question of what system of discipline. We've talked about the legal part of discipline tonight, from the reporting laws to due process to the local, arbitrary, and capricious following the code of conduct. We've talked about the legal part tonight. Now, PBIS is a valuable program, but it's a disciplinary program. It's not a process or a procedure. You can't confuse the two. And you can't say, well, PBIS says do this and you can do that. No, that's the next layer. After the DPI's reporting manual and your local code of conduct, then comes PBIS. And it cannot contradict either the first two. Again, there's a hierarchy. Just like when we did the OMA, federal law came first, then state law, board policy, best practices, teacher input. DPI's reporting manual comes first because it covers state law and federal law. Then your code of conduct, which covers state law and local board policy. Then comes PBIS. And so if you can't, under the guise of PBIS, ignore the first two. Oh, we don't have to do that because we're using PBIS. Yes, you have to do that. PBIS does not excuse you from either of those two authorities above them. PBIS is at the school and district level. It does not supersede the code of conduct nor the reporting manual from DPI. You have to be clear on that. Some folks interpret that as, oh, we don't have to follow any of that stuff if we do PBIS. There's a big debate in the unemployment line about that. You don't want to be one of those knuckleheads debating that in the unemployment line. I'm telling you now, PBIS cannot, will not, should not supersede any of the manuals. It is the third of the trilogy. It picks up with a code of conduct in terms of how do I operate at the school level before I get to the code of conduct and then to the state report. There is a hierarchy. PBIS does not supersede the other two. It is third in that hierarchy. Or any other disciplinary program would be third in that hierarchy. All right. Questions for me? Let's see. Next week, week 5. What's on tap for week 5? We've got a lot of stuff on week 5. All right. I suspect it's about time to get to sexual harassment. And I'm going to introduce the final evidence template to you in week 5 as well. That's something to be thinking about down the road. But we're going to do sexual harassment next week, and we're also going to do cyberbullying, which goes along with that. You've been doing your research and finding out those practices and policies in your district. I've seen most of you've already done that, done a very good job on that. So everybody seems to be playing along, and I appreciate that. You're doing well. Your evidence artifact work is wonderful. If I see stuff that needs working, I'll send it to Dr. Pickard or Dr. Stedman. I think Dr. Stedman, I don't know if he's with us tonight or not. I think he was at a board meeting tonight. But anyway, they're there to help you if you want to go straight to them, or if you put work in discussion board in this class shell, that's good. I'll just send you on. You don't need to bother them or bother yourself. Not them. Bother yourself with extra work if your work is good. I'll let you know if it's good or not, and we'll move it on. You don't need to put any steps in the process. I'm very pleased. We're moving very well. This is the first, this is the first time I know that y'all have only had a 10-week session, and I know some of you are a little panicky, but we'll get through it. It'll be okay. Y'all are doing really good work. I have no complaints, and I'm pleased that you're following along and being here with. We got 18 folks on tonight. That's really good, and everybody watches the videos and sends in those, and so. I don't see any problems right now, and that doesn't mean there aren't any there. If you're having problems, you can call or email. I'll get right back to you. There's disturbing thing going on with email now. The email is stacking, and I get like 18 before they'll come through. And so sometimes I'm about an hour behind. If I haven't gotten back to you in 2 hours, you email me or you call me. First hour, they're stacking, but they'll come through after about an hour. If you hadn't heard back from me, you need to get in touch with me, because we don't have time to wait this summer. All right. Anybody have anything for the good of the group? Let's scroll down and see who we got. It's good to see all of you tonight. I appreciate you joining us. Again, good job on everything you're doing. Dr. Pickard, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you, Lindsay. It was nice to see you again tonight. Everybody have a good week. We'll see you next week.